Sketchy, what are you doing?
Trying to figure out which yak is Yona's mom.
The world's not gonna end if you miss one MILF, you know.
No MILF left behind, Kevin. So, the Roundups have made it to the second half of Season 8. Time to evaluate what it brought to the table in August. Episode 14. I had a completely different thesis when I originally drafted my thoughts on this episode. It revolved around Starlight's poor handling of the situation with Discord and how it could have been easily avoided. And while that is still a problem, I realized that it was only a symptom of a greater issue regarding the episode's writing. Starlight figuring out that Discord was feeling left out is treated as some big realization when Discord made it very clear that he didn't appreciate feeling left out in the very beginning. And as I watched the episode's final scene unfold, it became apparent what went wrong here. Despite the fact that the reason Discord is upset was practically told to us by him in his first scene, the episode carries on as though that never happened, and frames his actions as though they're occurring for no reason. The show likes to pretend that Discord is this very cryptic figure whose motivations are difficult to figure out, but he isn't. He's honestly one of the most transparent characters in the series. It's beyond easy to tell what is bothering him and why it's bothering him, and therefore conflicts with him are very easy to avoid provided that you're paying the slightest bit of attention to his behavior. But because the show has this idea that he's hard to figure out in spite of how he actually is, they just continue the episode under the assumption that his motivations are unclear and even contradicts itself at points. When Starlight goes from 0 to 100 and blasts Discord into oblivion, Spike asks her why she didn't just talk to him instead of shutting him out all the time. But less than 10 seconds later, he says that Discord is just being Discord, thereby implying that there would be no point in asking him. He questions Starlight's actions, then almost immediately validates them. But that tired excuse of this chaotic character is just being themselves doesn't work when their reasoning was already told to us from the outset. There have been episodes that have been derided for having forced conflicts in the past, and I feel that this is the true example of a forced conflict. An episode where the characters are written as though they don't know what the cause of the problem is in spite of it being clearly laid out in front of them. An episode where the writers are bending over backwards to justify the conflict, with every attempt only further illustrating why it was a faulty premise to begin with. Episode 15. I'm gonna start off by saying this episode had a very rough start. You could practically feel the writers trying everything they could to make the Breakfast Club premise apply here, and it even comes at the expense of Twilight's competence as an administrator, preventing students that were studying abroad from going home for the holidays if no one confessed to the crime. Seriously? Once we get past that setup though, the episode is pretty okay. We finally get a story completely focused on the Young Six, which was beyond overdue. It's good to sit back and just watch them interact, learning more about each other and appreciating where they come from. And we even get some new moms and a cameo from the MILF Queen herself. I was honestly expecting an ending where some last minute troublemaker turns out to be the culprit, but it turns out that one of the Young Six actually was guilty and it tied in with his own personal holiday story. It made the climax more personal, and I ended up appreciating the episode a lot more. So while the setup was still painful and holds the episode back a bit, the story that followed was something I really enjoyed. You know what I would have enjoyed more? If we didn't have to wait until halfway through the season to finally get an episode about these kids, DHX. Episode 16. It's amazing how much this story had to stack the deck in Twilight's favor in order to make her side look good. Throughout the entire episode, I had absolutely no sympathy for her, which is a pretty big achievement when you're putting her up against two con artists and a racist. It would be one thing if she just gave the school a try in good faith and started noticing problems, then she would have a plausible reason to investigate. But instead, the episode decided to go about it in a way that made her look arguably worse than the scammers she was trying to expose. When she says that she isn't jealous, I just don't believe her because her actions contradict that assertion. While Flim and Flam used the notion of Twilight being jealous as a power play to get her to stop investigating them, that notion isn't really a false one. If they had published that story about Twilight trying to discredit Friendship U out of jealousy, it really can't be considered slander because it's true. Twilight's decision to investigate wasn't based in any actual evidence that there was foul play at work. It was purely based on preconceived notions of Flim and Flam and jealousy that Star Sorrel was at their school and not hers. But because Friendship U did end up being a scam, all of Twilight's jealousy and prejudice is now justified, at least in the eyes of the writers. And this is what I mean when I say that the story stacks the deck in her favor. And this isn't the first time this has happened. In the season premiere, in order to make the standard procedure of accrediting a school seem like a bad thing, they framed the EEA as ominous figures and characterized its leader as a xenophobe. In order to make the idea of a competing school seem like a bad thing, they have it turn out to be a scam. And what makes this worse is that Twilight wasn't like this before. I could kinda understand this behavior if it were coming from AJ or Dash, because while it wouldn't make the episode better overall, it would still be behavior that I would expect from them. But Twilight used to be a character that required proof before casting suspicion. Now she jumps to conclusions so much that she's practically burning calories. It's an increasingly occurring trend where Twilight will heap mountains of accusations onto a character with no proof just because they were a minor antagonist in the past, despite being the same person that has forgiven and exonerated people that have committed far worse crimes. If you're gonna be a bitch, at least be a consistent bitch. At least in No Second Prances, they tried to make it a lesson for Twilight to learn about being overly suspicious, but here they justify her shit behavior in order for her to be in the right, just like a certain other episode in this roundup. It goes without saying, thank God for Rarity, because she at least helped me get through this episode by providing some good laughs, but other than that, god damn was this a mess. And the messed up part about it is that I'd still take paying for Flim and Flam's worksheets over the expenses of an actual college.
Sketchy, the loan officer is here again.
Tell him I'm not home. Episode 17. I didn't think this needed to be said, but it's never a good idea to make people prove their friendship. As soon as I saw that Rarity and Dash were going to be used as an example of how people with disparate interests can still be friends, I knew this was going to be a slog to get through. It's one thing to candidly observe how two people interact in order to get a feel for how their relationship works, but when you put a spotlight on a friendship and say, just act normal and pretend we aren't here, then anything they do from there isn't going to be normal or natural because they know they're being observed. It puts unnecessary pressure on them to validate why they're friends and leads to unnecessary arguments that wouldn't have occurred otherwise, which is exactly what happened with Rarity and Dash. Still, I held on, hoping that maybe there was a point to all this. Maybe Twilight learns that turning her friends into social experiments isn't a good idea. Instead, they just get tricked into being friends again by the character that indirectly caused their falling out to begin with. The thing is, I can see what they were trying to do here. I love the idea of an episode exploring Rarity and Rainbow's relationship dynamic. It's one of the least explored main 6 pairings, and the few moments we do get with them have been at the very least enjoyable, but instead of showcasing their dynamic naturally, the story just forces them to break up and make up. Honestly, if you want a good story about how people with different interests can still be friends, just watch Uncommon Bond. You can tell that the show is trying so hard to sell you on the school of friendship idea. They're trying too hard. It's coming at the expense of established characters, and it really begs the question of whether this idea was worth the problems that it either directly or indirectly causes. Episode 18. So as I was scripting this video and got to this episode, I realized that pretty much all my thoughts on Yakety Sax and why it was such a garbage fire were already discussed in Pink and Tired 2.5 months ago. So instead of repeating myself, I'd like to just take this time to reflect. I've been saying that Pinky was a poorly written character for what, 4 years now? And it took 8 seasons for people to start seeing what I've been seeing all this time. Makes me wonder what took them so long. I suppose it's because the writers forgot to include a distraction in this episode. Usually when an episode like this comes out, there's a celebrity guest star, or a fan favorite character is included, or Pinky isn't the main focus, or there's a catchy earworm song that was never that good to begin with. Those things usually distract the fans from seeing the terrible themes, but this episode had none of that, and therefore it had nothing to hide behind, so the inherent problems in Pinky's character were front and center for everyone to see, and no one could ignore it. I suppose I can't blame people for being taken aback by how bad this episode turned out to be. I mean, it's not like we had someone pointing out all these problems long before this episode was even conceived. Funny how that works, isn't it? Well, that does it for the August roundup, and man, this month was some rough shit, bruh. I don't think I've ever done a roundup with this many back-to-back duds. The only good episode here was Heart's Warming Club, and even that episode had some problems. In the next roundup, I'll be covering the remaining episodes in the season, and I really hope season 8 can pull itself together because this is quite the losing streak we got here. So what did you think of these episodes? Swarm that comment section below or bug me on social media. Until next time, keep it sketchy, folks.